The pen was already touching the contract when a tired single father suddenly stepped into the boardroom and said the one thing nobody in that room expected to hear: "Please don't sign that." Every executive turned toward him as if he had lost his mind. The CEO froze with her signature half-finished, staring at the man in a faded work jacket who had somehow walked past 3 layers of security. But what she didn't know was that this exhausted father had spent the entire morning trying to keep his little daughter from losing the only home she had ever known. And what neither of them knew yet was that the person secretly controlling the deal was someone whose name would change both their lives forever. If you believe kindness can create second chances, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the person standing in your way is actually the person standing between you and a terrible mistake. The man's name was Rowan Mercer, a 38-year-old single father who worked maintenance and deliveries for a small property management company in the city. He wasn't rich, powerful, or well-connected. His clothes were practical, his shoes were worn, and there were faint shadows beneath his eyes from years of sleeping lightly because his daughter sometimes woke from nightmares. Rowan had learned how to cook inexpensive dinners, repair broken toys, braid hair badly but lovingly, and stretch one paycheck across expenses that seemed to grow faster every month. His 9-year-old daughter, Sienna, was the center of his world. After her mother had left their lives years earlier, Rowan had promised himself that no matter how difficult life became, Sienna would never feel unwanted. That morning, however, everything had started falling apart. Rowan's employer had received notice that the apartment complex where they lived was being sold to a major development company. The new owners planned to demolish the older buildings and replace them with luxury apartments. Tenants had been given notices to leave, but most had no idea where they would go. Rowan had tried every legal avenue he could find, but the property manager had told him there was nothing anyone could do. The building was old, the land was valuable, and the company buying it had enough money to make almost any problem disappear. Then Rowan discovered something strange. While repairing a damaged electrical panel in the management office, he had accidentally found a discarded folder containing copies of documents connected to the sale. One document listed the company purchasing the property. Another contained a series of payments to a consulting firm that had no obvious reason to be involved. But the final page made Rowan's stomach tighten. It showed that the same investment group had recently purchased several properties across the city, including buildings occupied by elderly residents, low-income families, and small businesses. The pattern was too obvious to ignore. Rowan didn't understand corporate finance, but he understood people. He knew when something was being hidden. So he followed the paperwork. The trail led to a prestigious downtown tower belonging to a company called Vera Holdings, one of the city's most powerful development firms. Its CEO, Maris Vale, was known for being brilliant, disciplined, and nearly impossible to manipulate. At 39, she had built the company from a struggling investment firm into a corporation worth billions. Newspapers called her ruthless because she rarely allowed emotion to influence business decisions. Rowan had no appointment. No connection. No influence. But he had one thing the executives upstairs didn't have: a reason to keep digging. By midday, Rowan was standing outside Vera Holdings with a folder pressed against his chest. Security stopped him immediately. He explained that he needed to speak with Maris Vale about the property acquisition. They told him the CEO was in a private board meeting. Rowan asked them to deliver the documents. They refused. He tried calling the number listed on the corporate website, but his call went nowhere. Then he noticed a service elevator opening. For one desperate second, Rowan thought about turning around. Instead, he stepped inside. Upstairs, Maris Vale sat at the head of a long glass conference table while executives reviewed the final acquisition contract. Outside the enormous windows, the city looked bright and peaceful under the clear afternoon sky. Everything in the room was polished, controlled, and expensive. The deal was worth hundreds of millions, and once Maris signed the final papers, the acquisition would be nearly impossible to reverse. She lifted the pen. That was when Rowan entered. The room erupted in confusion. Security rushed behind him, but Rowan raised both hands and said he wasn't there to cause trouble. He was there because the documents on the table didn't tell the whole story. Maris looked at him with cold disbelief. Rowan placed his folder on the table and explained what he had found. At first, the executives laughed. One accused him of stealing confidential documents. Another called him a disgruntled tenant trying to interfere with a legitimate transaction. Rowan stood there absorbing every insult because he knew that walking away meant Sienna could lose her home. Then Maris opened the folder. She expected nonsense. Instead, she found payment records, property transfer dates, shell company connections, and a series of signatures that made her expression slowly change. The consulting company receiving millions from the deal wasn't independent at all. It was connected to a private investment fund that had been quietly buying controlling interests in several companies that Vera Holdings depended on. Maris looked at one signature again. Her face became pale. The person behind the entire arrangement wasn't a stranger. It was her own father, Alastair Vale. Alastair had once been the man who taught Maris everything about business. He had also been the reason she became so determined never to be controlled by anyone. Years earlier, after a bitter disagreement, Maris had separated her personal life from his business empire. She believed she had built Vera Holdings independently. But the documents showed something far worse. Alastair had been secretly manipulating transactions through intermediary companies, using Vera's acquisitions to increase his own control over the city's real estate market. The apartment complex where Rowan and Sienna lived wasn't merely another development opportunity. It was one piece of a larger plan to force struggling communities out, drive property values upward, and eventually gain control over entire districts. Maris stared at the final document. Her own signature appeared on an authorization page. But she hadn't signed it. Someone had forged her approval. The room fell silent. Rowan watched the powerful CEO realize that the man she trusted most had been using her company as a vehicle for something she would never have approved. For several moments, nobody moved. Then Maris asked Rowan why he had risked everything to bring the documents to her. His answer was simple. He said he wasn't trying to save a building. He was trying to save his daughter from learning that losing your home was something poor people were simply expected to accept. Those words broke through something Maris had spent years protecting. She had grown up surrounded by wealth but had never felt safe inside it. Her father had taught her that vulnerability was weakness and compassion was a liability. She had spent her adult life proving that she could be stronger than everyone expected. But now a tired father standing in front of her had shown her something she had forgotten. Strength wasn't always about winning. Sometimes strength meant stopping before someone else got hurt. Maris refused to sign the contract. She ordered an immediate internal investigation, suspended the acquisition, and contacted independent legal authorities. Within weeks, the evidence Rowan had uncovered triggered investigations into several connected transactions. The people who had dismissed him as an ordinary maintenance worker suddenly wanted to know his name. But Rowan didn't care about recognition. He cared about Sienna. The investigation eventually confirmed that the residents had been deliberately targeted as part of the larger scheme. The demolition plans were cancelled, and Vera Holdings created a community preservation program to protect the properties from predatory acquisitions. Maris could have simply apologized to Rowan and moved on. Instead, she visited his neighborhood. She walked through the old apartment complex in the middle of a bright afternoon, seeing cracked sidewalks, tiny balconies filled with plants, children riding bicycles, and elderly neighbors sitting outside their doors. It wasn't luxurious, but it was alive. Sienna approached her cautiously. She had heard her father talking about the CEO who had stopped the sale. Maris knelt beside her and told her that her father had done something very brave. Sienna smiled and said she already knew. That moment stayed with Maris. Over the following months, Vera Holdings began rebuilding the neighborhood instead of destroying it. Repairs were made. Unsafe wiring was replaced. A small community center was created in an unused building. Rowan was offered a management position, but he accepted only after Maris promised that residents would have a real voice in decisions affecting their homes. For the first time in years, Rowan wasn't simply surviving. He was building something. And Maris changed too. She began visiting the community center regularly. She listened more than she spoke. She learned the names of people whose lives had once appeared to her as numbers on financial spreadsheets. She discovered that leadership wasn't about standing above people. It was about standing beside them when the difficult choices arrived. Months later, Rowan found Sienna sitting on the front steps of their apartment, drawing a picture. It showed a tall building, a little girl, her father, and a woman standing beside them. Rowan asked who the woman was. Sienna said she was the person who had learned that houses weren't just buildings. They were memories. They were birthdays. They were scraped knees, school mornings, family dinners, and the place where children learned what safety felt like. Rowan looked across the street. Maris was standing there, watching the neighborhood children play. Their eyes met. Neither needed to say anything. A single father had walked into a boardroom believing he was only trying to save his daughter's home. Instead, he had uncovered a hidden scheme, changed the future of an entire neighborhood, and reminded one of the most powerful women in the city that compassion was not weakness. Sometimes the bravest person in the room isn't the one wearing the most expensive suit. Sometimes it's the exhausted parent who has every reason to stay silent but chooses to speak because someone he loves deserves a chance. And sometimes, the person who stops you from signing your name on the wrong line isn't your enemy at all. Sometimes, they're the reason you finally discover what your success was supposed to mean. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes ordinary people can make extraordinary differences, and subscribe to Hardworking Dad for more stories about courage, family, kindness, and second chances. And before you leave, please comment, kindness still matters, if you believe one brave decision can change more than a single life. Because Rowan didn't have billions. He didn't have influence. He didn't even have a seat at the table. He simply had the courage to stand up when everyone else was ready to sign. And sometimes, that is more powerful than money could ever be.